Muscle Radio.
Welcome back to Heavy Muscle Radio. I'm Dave Palumbo, and on the line now I have our first guest, Dr. Scott Connelly, back to the show. We haven't talked to you in several months, Scott, and I was holding off on this interview because I wanted to announce all the great stuff we got coming up. Say it's true, you got a new company coming out.
Yes, sir. I do. After repeated requests over the past year to, bring something back to the market that currently isn't available, I've decided to yield to popular demand and bring something out that I think will, serve the community of people who want to build physique through muscle weight training pretty substantially.
It's interesting because you always have been an innovator in this industry in everything you do, and you kind of. I got a phone call from Vince Andrich, who you're working on the company with, and he kind of filled me in on some of your ideas. Then we spoke, and I think it's brilliant. You've seen the new trend, I guess, in bodybuilding has been that they launched a men's physique division, and really, in essence, more people, probably 85% of the people who work out, want to have a physique that looks like a smaller version of a big bodybuilder. You want to call it a men's physique. You want to call it a Jersey Shore physique, whatever you want to call it. People want ripped abs. They want a good amount of muscle, but they want to still be able to buy clothing. And you have targeted this new company, which is now going to be called MyoTropics, Physique Nutrition, MyoTropics, targeted toward this. All physique athletes can use these type of products, but what was the impetus behind this thought process?
Well, really, Dave, as I think you're aware from the conversations we've had on your show and the conversations that I've tried to put out on the Body Arcs radio show in the last year, what we've tried to emphasize is that for people who really want to control body composition, there are certain key tenets that they have to embrace as being the reality check. There are two ways to reliably induce muscle hypertrophy in association with an effective resistance training regimen. There is a nutritive approach that engages the pathways that are known to exist within muscle cells that directly translate to some enhancement of the protein synthetic process. And there's a pharmacologic approach, which obviously has been the platform that all of the competitive physique athletes for the last 30 years have more or less had to embrace to be competitive. And there now, I think, has been sort of a turning point or a threshold crossed where the degree to which people have, embraced pharmacologic enhancement has gone sort of over the top. And there are a number of people who are simply unwilling to take that, if you will, daredevil approach to physique enhancement, because as you correctly point out, the end result that, appears to be the competitive standard produces individuals who look more like cartoon characters than they do, sort of muscular human beings. And I think from the numbers that I've seen and, discussed with Vince, that that's going to be a growing trend, that there are a number of people, both at a competitive level and more importantly, at a non-competitive level, essentially aspire to control the look of their physique, and they want, a look that would, for example, be highly coveted by, a physique model, someone in the Madison Avenue track who, wants to have, an opportunity to be a professional model with a lot of, body shot type work, right. Shirtless, et cetera, et cetera. And those individuals, I think, are the individuals who would, embrace very enthusiastically an approach which keys in on the two most important natural modifiers of body composition. That is effective training, because I've made the point many, many times that, and it's often overlooked, that, muscle hypertrophy is an intrinsic process. The most important stimulus that the muscle cell will make adaptations in response to is the training and loading sequence. So from the standpoint of people who are willing to do the work, they would like, an accessory modality, a synergistic, opportunity to add on to their exercise-induced gains. And that, for the person who is unwilling to even think about embracing the pharmacologic track, is the nutritive track. And when it comes right down to, the bare bones of that, there are just a handful of nutritional products, not chemical products disguised as nutritional products like, bizarre stimulants and so forth that nobody has a clue really what they're doing or what they're supposed to be doing, but real nutritive elements that intersect with described pathways of muscle protein synthesis and its regulation, either from the production of more muscle protein or the inhibition of muscle protein breakdown. These are the attributes that determine net protein balance inside muscle cells, and both those dynamics, synthesis and breakdown, are amenable to nutritional modulation, and there are substances with proven effects in both those sort of parallel, pathways.
Well,
that's really what we.
I just wanted to interrupt for a second because I want to translate exactly what you're saying in simplistic terms here, because what you're basically saying is that there are people out there that don't want to take anabolic steroids and growth hormone, and because they don't need to be that big, but they want to manipulate the food they're eating. They want to take supplements that they know are going to induce changes in their body for the positive to enable them to put muscle on, burn fat. And obviously you have a reputation with dating back to the early 1990s when you invented the original Metrex formula, obviously, moving forward into some of the other projects you've done and the research you've done over the years. I think you felt, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think you felt you're at a point now where you have a knowledge base and you have a supplemental understanding of how to combine these supplements in such a way that you could create a product, or you've created a product that will induce these changes and help people to achieve this physique level of development that they're looking for just by adding a couple of key supplements to their regimen. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, as you know, I kind of started out, as a voice in the industry of some distinction back in the early 90s by talking about, the keystone of metabolic adaptation to the ingestion of food substrates with respect to adaptations. And that I've always referred to as a partitioning influence or a repartitioning. When the body is faced with a complex challenge to readjust, priority distribution of nutrients based on external circumstances, and clearly, a vigorous resistance training program is a marked, stimulus away from the human body. Those adaptations always engender a core repartitioning algorithm within the metabolic regulatory cycles. If you've been listening to any of the Body RX radio programs over the past year, you know that a central tenet of this is that what is being monitored is not kilocalories, but distribution of nutrients, allocation of nutrients, with a very specific backdrop that states categorically there has to be a supervisory role for some element of this metabolic regulation to take care of blood glucose, because the brain needs it all the time. So all of the manipulations that are key and can be enjoined or entrained by a nutritional modulation of the diet is centered around this backdrop of what is being monitored is a allocation argument and a distribution strategy that constantly looks at an absolute threshold level of provision of glucose to the brain. So what that immediately leads to the conclusion, if you're a molecular physiologist, is that you have to have an understanding of the nutrients that segue into that glucose control in the most direct way. And guess what? Those are amino acids. Amino acids are the backdraw or the backstop for an inadequate glucose supply on a minute-by-minute basis through a process that we call gluconeogenesis, or the production of endogenous glucose from precursors, which in this case would be the amino acids either derived from dietary intake or the breakdown and reutilization of tissue proteins and their constituent amino acids. So for 35 years or so, that has been my focus from an intellectual standpoint, is where are there points of intersection with respect to amino acid metabolism that can essentially benefit a person who wants to engage a partitioning influence that traps more of those amino acids as new muscle protein rather than sacrifice in a glucose factory or an adipose tissue factory. Right. So that's really the cornerstone of my work in this area, and the Metrex product was the first elaboration of a strategy that I thought effectively and trained that. And what I have now, with the advent of much more information having accrued over the past, couple of decades, is, a new perspective and a new formulation that basically is back to the future. That, once again, if you want something that works, you have to capture the nuance of amino acid metabolism to do it.
And I think the important thing is that people realize about what you just said is that the key is tricking the body into using the amino acids, the protein that you're consuming, for building muscle rather than turning it into glucose for the brain, and then forcing the body to use stored body fat to fuel the process of building the muscle. And that's what you always termed as repartitioning, or teaching the body how to use the right nutrients. And you said always, I remember this is a key thing that you said in the very first seminar I ever heard you talk at. You said that the foods we eat or how we combine supplements, you can actually influence this process. And I think this is an important point, because I think a lot of supplements out on the market are just shotgun type approaches where they just throw a bunch of ingredients together and hope it'll do what they think it's going to do, and there's really no science as to how they're combined and what amounts and what nutrients feed or assist in helping to accomplish this. You have a new product out, is going to be called Physique 2.0. It has not hit the market. It's kind of are you packaging it similar to the way the old Metrics was done?
Yeah, we think we're going to have the opportunity to give consumers, options for the consumption from the standpoint of, home-based use versus out in the world. And as you know, I've recently, in the past year or so, elaborated this little plastic capsule that sort of allows a person the ultimate portability for a single serve, consumption opportunity. Any place that you have access to a commercial water bottle, either a 500 mil or a 250 mil bottle of water, you can have one of these capsules affixed to the top of it, and shake a serving anywhere. You can, in an airplane seat, in your automobile, at your desk, et cetera, and we would have packaging to accommodate bulk type delivery of product versus individual serving type delivery.
Gotcha. So you can have you can have your computer bag. You can have a couple of these little devices that will screw onto the top of your water bottle, deliver the protein into the water. You shake it up. You have an instant shake right there with very little, worry or scurry. Then you have, I guess you'll have a tub or something like that, a multiple serving type of a.
Yeah, we're thinking that the trend now is for poly bags of stuff. Gotcha. That are a little more compressible from the standpoint as you consume the product. The volume of the container changes with the volume of the product, and for people who will pack stuff to go to the gym or something, a bag is a little more portable than a rigid bottle. But like I said, we're kind of working on the details of that. The key is to make the consistency of intake, which is the key, because these things only work if they establish sort of what's akin to a mathematical integration. You need dosing over time on a consistent basis to get the maximum effect. So we want to make it entirely possible for an individual to schedule consumptions of the product whenever and wherever they are,
in a convenient way, obviously.
Yep.
Now, I just did a seminar this past weekend out in Jersey, and the question I get a lot, and I'm sure you get this all the time too, is what about post-workout nutrition? And I'm an advocate of this window of opportunity, so to speak, following your weight training session, of when you should consume and what you should consume. And I'm always asked, what should I consume and why? And I actually parrot back to most people what you have instilled in my mind, and that we've talked about many times on the show before, that a single 30-gram serving of protein from a complete protein source, preferably a whey protein or something similar to that has a very high leucine value to it, will essentially turn on the protein rebuilding machinery in the cell and start the repair process, that being the most important aspect, obviously. And then invariably you get the questions about what about carbs and insulin and nitric oxide releasing products, and the bare bones. What's the single most important thing, Scott, post-workout, and how will your new product, Physique 2.0, address that?
Well, the single most important element is a very simple answer. The post-workout stimulation of fractional synthesis of muscle proteins is primarily augmented by the training stimulus. That stimulus, being an external, stimulus to the body, is transmitted to the muscle cell via the essentially the externally mounted stretch receptors on the myoplasm surface, the surface membrane. That signal, that external signal of, stretch, is transduced and delivered into the interior of the cell, where it ultimately acts on a central nodal point of control in muscle protein synthesis called the mTOR, or mammalian targeted rapamycin complex. This is the structure that receives input from all of the relevant signaling, apparatus extant in the body. In other words, if you're going to allocate, if you're a cell and you view your job as a business, in other words, the job of any cell is the delivery of goods or services. And that's just like any other, real world human business. You're trying to gauge unpredictable demand. So at any given point in time, the delivery of new muscle protein has to be, predicated upon the availability of substrate and the competition for that substrate. If you have inventory in the form of amino acids that are available to make new muscle proteins, a decision has to be made whether there's a higher priority need for those amino acids and whether muscle protein synthesis can go forward or not. And if it can go forward, to what degree and for how long. So the complex inside muscle cells, and in fact inside all cells, that really is the central nodal point of control, of integration of all these discrepant messages about needs and supply and urgency and whatnot, is this mTOR complex. It receives enough direct molecular information from all of these major, endpoints to make operational decisions. And one of the decisions is to send a signal downstream to some other communicating molecules that allow for the enhancement of what I call the assembly line of muscle protein manufacture. That's called in scientific terms the translation apparatus. There is a key element in protein, an amino acid called leucine, that has a direct influence at the level of the mTOR complex in activating it to send a signal downstream to the effectors in the protein factory that say to the workers on the assembly line, you guys need to speed up your process. We need to produce more protein molecules now. The message can be delivered. In other words, if you think of the leucine as an intermediate floor manager in a factory, the leucine can deliver the message we need. The boss says we need more protein. The boss in this case would be the nucleus of the cell, which integrates all activity of the metabolic, exchange. The boss wants more protein, get it done. Well, the job can only be done if the constituent parts, just like the parts on an automobile assembly line, are available. You can speed the assembly line up. If you don't have the parts to keep pace, you're not going to affect a net increase in product production. So all of these things are gauged to work together. Leucine is a switch, so to speak. It turns a switch that says we need to increase the efficiency of this assembly line. That's a moot point or a moot command if the constituent parts that would be necessary to assemble proteins are not available. So the idea behind consuming a high leucine-containing protein is A, to provide the signal, but that protein should be of composition amino acid-wise so that the constituent amino acids required to actually assemble complete proteins and maintain their stability in the post-translation or post-assembly line condition is assured. So taking leucine by itself in the absence of the relative increase in amino acid supply to the muscle that would be needed to fulfill this, sort of constituent parts assembly is a waste of time.
It's naive too to think
studies,
that.
Yeah. So in essence, that's the rationale for saying there is a reason, and the reason is synergy. In other words, that the activation of the mTOR complex is guaranteed through the phosphatidic acid pathway receptors to be engaged by the workout itself. That's a given. So you get that. as a bare minimum. And depending on the intensity of the training and so forth, the degree to which that post-workout enhancement of mTOR activation can vary over a several-hour period of time, including up to 24 hours, depending, again, on the intensity of the actual work protocol. So you get that as a given. What you want is some kind of augmentation that's truly more than additive. In other words, 2 + 2 = 6, not
right.
2 + 2 = 4.
And how do we get that?
And well, that's the nutritive pathway. And, the current understanding that is, widespread in the industry is that, an effective delivery of a leucine dose, which in most individuals of normal body size is about 2.5 to 3 grams, will maximize that signaling, initiation. Then if you have a constituent supply of amino acids, as would be included in an animal or dairy protein, you're guaranteed the component parts will be there at the assembly line for the assembly line's acceleration and the production of new enhanced muscle protein synthesis. The duration of that is usually from the standpoint of a rapidly absorbed protein, like a whey protein, for example. The timeline for the maximal stimulation is about 3 hours in multiple human studies where this has been assessed directly. So if your strategy is simply to double down on that mTOR activation with an exercise plus nutrition stimulus, the goal can be easily satisfied by a whey protein supplement of about net 30 grams, which will, on average, whey protein is about 10% leucine by weight, so 30 grams net will give you 3 grams of leucine.
Gotcha.
There's your signal. 30 grams will have plenty of the constituent amino acids so that you get the complete protein manufacture that would be initiated by the command signal coming from leucine.
So
if you want to extend that...
So insulin has nothing to do with this process. I want to just clarify this, because insulin.
Don't understand is that, there are populations of humans who developed in regions of the earth, like the circumpolar north, where there were no carbohydrates for this kind of purpose. There was dietary fat and dietary protein, and that was it. And again, going back to my comment that the reason amino acids must be considered to be the keystone metabolic currency of the body is because they are the substrates that provide for glucose production intrinsically inside the body without dietary influence that is necessary to sustain glucose production for the brain under all circumstances, including starvation. So in essence, a system had to evolve in parallel with this amino acid metabolic scheme that would allow for, the engagement of insulin in the absence of carbohydrate, and that's what you find with the insulinotropic branched chain amino acids. They induce by themselves through an iterative series of steps beginning in the gut an insulin response coincident with their uptake into muscle cells that is sufficient in and of itself to augment by whatever means somebody would want to point to, and most people agree it would be the inhibition of protein breakdown, not the enhancement of synthesis, at a physiologic level of insulin. You don't need the additive surge of a carbohydrate. And when this has been examined in human beings, looking at the precise release and profiling of the myogenic regulatory factors, the additive effects of carbohydrate and excess insulin are not important in the slightest with respect to that physiologic response. So you don't need to take additional carbohydrate to influence the plateau that you would achieve in terms of augmented fractional synthesis of muscle proteins. What you can see with carbohydrate is an extension of the window of time in which that's operative. If people are looking at carbohydrate as a post-workout nutrient, then the thought should be not enhancing muscle protein synthesis quantitatively, but extending its duration chronologically.
Gotcha.
Or temporally. So in essence, it makes sense for individuals who want a 24/7 approach to muscle protein synthesis to understand that the idea would be to provide at all times, at all periods of the day, a profile of amino acidemia, that is levels of amino acids in the blood with pulsatile stimulation by the key triggering molecule leucine that would continuously stimulate the maximal rate of muscle protein synthesis. And that's relevant regardless of whether it's post-workout or not. And that's where I think, my new product can be of great utility, because it basically skews to that notion that the integration of protein metabolism has to be 24/7. Most people have focused rather rigidly on, well, I got to get this post-workout. Well, no, that's helpful. Yes, it is. But if you miss the boat in terms of the reality check that this is an integration, it's essentially amount over time. And time is 24/7. These processes can be driven continuously, more or less, successfully by the appropriate nutrient intake if you kind of know what to do. And again, like I say, the real nuance is to try and figure out how to effectively compete with all of these other, sinkholes for amino acid disposition, of which glucose production is the number one. So that was kind of like the cornerstone of my work with the first Metrex product, is obviate the obvious, enormous propensity for a lot of the dietary amino acids to immediately get converted to glucose. What you want is a repartitioning substrate algorithm. That is, we want maximal fat oxidation, and there's rules about that, and they're not calorie rules, they're substrate rules. So you want maximal fat oxidation, you want fat to do its job, and that is to be called upon 24/7 to deliver required energy. Fat is not a piggy bank, okay? It's a coin purse. You allocate fat molecules for oxidation continuously if you want to minimize body fat. And that is a trick metabolically that skews off the interaction between glucose availability, amino acid availability, and insulin levels. And if you massage those three with some degree of precision, you get an enormous, positive effect in the partitioning profile of the body, where fat oxidation is maximized, lean tissue accrual is maximized, and glucose disposal is maximized, and in the oxidative utilization of glucose, which is in muscle, versus the non-oxidative disposal, which is when it goes in and makes more fat cells, or makes more triglyceride in fat cells.
Now, if anyone were listening to this and didn't get the whole context of what you said and missed it and just tuned in the last minute, they would think you were talking about a drug almost that would do this, because there are drugs that do this. Anabolic steroids will influence muscle accrual at the expense of body fat, and will help with glucose disposal. It's incredible that you can, by combining the right nutrients together in the right ratios with the right substrates, you can actually create drug-like effects. And this is what you've coined as that repartitioning effect. And I am assuming that's why you included it in the name of the new product, Physique 2.0 Repartitioning Substrate Technology, probably RST for short. What can people expect from using this? How do they apply it to their daily regimen?
Well, the reality is, again, for, all those who are, realistic about this, is that the drugs, although they do similar things, have different mechanisms of action and have advantages in that because their effects tend to be more nuclear centered. In other words, drugs usually impart their effects through some messaging manipulation that emanates from the nucleus of the cell. And that's difficult to overcome with any natural substance, because the dose of the drug more or less is a driver. You can increment constantly the dose of the drug and get more and more and more incremental effects, which are not subject to an automatic braking system, as would be a natural process that is essentially taking place under close scrutiny of the rest of the body. In other words, the natural nutritive approach to this process of muscle building and fat loss is set always against the backdrop of what else is going on in the body, and therefore subject to the rule of priority. In other words, if you have a massive, burn injury, there's nothing you're going to be able to do naturally to overcome the enormous catabolic loss of muscle protein that would ensue from that, simply because the prioritization of signaling intrinsically and occurring naturally in these multiply redundant loops of disposal of nutrient is regulating towards the highest priority, which in the burn patient is activation of their immune system. And so the call for, carbon to be cannibalized from muscle proteins to fuel purine and pyrimidine synthesis for DNA production in lymphocytes is going to be the high priority signal. And there's no nutritive solution to overcome that. So we're not talking, however, about extremes like that. We're talking about much more subtle effects that for each individual will be determined by trial and error, because there's this thing called genetics that determines the individual variability. And the individual variability in this arena is huge, as you well know, Dave.
Sure. Someone like myself might respond much, much better to a product like yours than someone else might. Yeah.
One of the things that people have to embrace is that, the degree to which, this individual variability manifests itself is rather striking. I mean, it's huge. And we don't understand the molecular underpinnings of it by any measure. And so that's just something that everybody has to accept. All of these concepts work in a generic sort of principle way. The degree to which the absolute result is impacted by individual genetic, variants is just impossible to overcome. But the fact is that these pathways exist in everybody. The degree to which you can manipulate them has genetic constraints. But if you're really, sort of keyed into, I want to do everything I can naturally without resorting to pharmaceuticals, then, this is the way to go.
What would be, I guess, because I know what people are going to ask me. They're going to say to me, how should I best spend my money in buying supplements? And I'm a big advocate of using things that obviously have effect. And my always number one answer to people is always like, invest in a good whey protein type product. How would you recommend people use your product? Would you recommend? I mean, because I remember back in the day, you had me I was using almost 6 servings of MyoTropics a day. Is this one of these products that the more you use, kind of the better it works, especially for the larger bodybuilders? For a regular person, for a guy who's like, who just wants to look good and wants to really reshape their body, wants to go on a diet, lose some body fat, get ripped abs, how would you suggest incorporating this in? 2 shakes a day, 3 shakes a day?
Well, I actually would default really right back to what, my position on the MyoTropics product was, and that is that you should consider, this new product your anchor, nutritional platform, and consider food to be supplementary to that. That's the reason that, back in the early 90s when, people were first exposed to MyoTropics, they found spontaneously that the more they took, the more results they got, which was obviously because the better the results, the more packets people buy. It's kind of a never-ending, rat on a wheel type thing where the more you took, the better the result, the more you bought, the more you used, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really, what I'm talking about here is that if your focus is really to gear your metabolism to a repartitioning from the utilization of carbohydrate and carbon derived from muscle proteins as fuel and fat as fuel, and to redirect those carbon atoms into muscle protein building, then you really need to consider this product your core food and sort of eat whole foods strategically around it. So again, my advice for anybody really is to seek your own level of maximal benefit by incrementing the servings from, 1 or 2 a day up to several a day, and see, where your body, stops responding to it. My feeling is that it's going to be pretty much the same, experience as was observed with consumers of MyoTropics, that, they really couldn't find, a point at which taking another packet on a regular basis didn't accrue additional benefits.
Interesting. And so let's say I'm a men's physique competitor. I'm looking to get ripped for a show. Maybe right now I'm eating 5 times a day, 5 food meals. Would you recommend doing like 3 shakes, maybe 3 meals? Because I always found that it worked well when I did like meal shake, kind of staggered the consumption of the shakes and the meals.
Well, as long as the staggering, conforms to, what would be required to maintain the plasma levels of amino acid and insulin that, we're trying to develop with the product intake, then that would be a reasonable strategy.
Let's talk a little bit about the education process, because you and I on the page with regard to this is, when you come out with a very sophisticated product, there really is an education curve involved in it so that people understand why, say, your product, protein meal replacement shake, is going to be far superior to whatever else is out there. When I think of out there, I think of the Walmart brands of protein that you take home and you wind up crapping your pants all night because of the excessive lactose amount in there. On that note, we are launching a new radio show on rxmuscle.com, which will be called Physique Star Radio. Will be hosted by my editor-in-chief of the Men's Physique site, Ian Lauer, and Vince Andrich, your partner in MyoTropics. And it will feature segments from them on there with regard to the world of men's physique. And it will feature a novel, I guess you could say, nutritional weekly segment known as Muscle University with yourself and me. And we will feature topics every week, either stuff that interests the both of us, or we are going to be open to people suggesting topics that we discuss. And I think that's important because we really want to know what the listeners out there want to know about. Is this something that excites you, Scott, that you're going to be able to communicate with the audience, with the people who are essentially going to be using your products?
Well, yes, because I think, for the people who really are, desirous of a positive, result in terms of recomposition of their body, they should focus their time and their money on items that are at least guaranteed to have a positive impact on that dimension. A lot of these products that are out there that have these bizarre, very, esoteric, unknown, undocumented ingredients that promise, all manner of result that rarely deliver anything except perhaps some, form of stimulation or something else like that. If somebody is desirous of the feeling that those kinds of products impart, that's one thing, but they should understand that there is no really, a substantiated body of evidence to indicate that they will have any impact on muscle protein growth in a human being. Stimulants and so forth, unless they, skew to the true beta agonist, pharmaceutical domain, are not, going to have a measurable impact on muscle protein accrual. So one of the things that, a person who's really dedicated to maximizing their results has to get a grip on is, if you have limited disposable income, what do you want to spend that money on? You want to spend it on something, more servings of something that's, pretty much guaranteed to have a beneficial effect on body composition? Or do you want to spend, a nominal amount on those things and then spend a whole bunch on a bunch of esoteric things that have a lot of hype and a lot of, consumer spin or takeaway, but really don't have any documented efficacy for adding muscle and losing fat? You know as well as I do that a lot of these things are trying to replicate, what was available from, the ephedrine hydrochloride deal, and none of them do. No. Because they're not, chemically, similar to that compound and don't have its molecular effects. They might make somebody, wild-eyed and crazy for a couple of hours, but, that's not muscle building. That's, central nervous system stimulation. That's separate and apart from muscle building.
I'm in 100% agreement with that. I think that really the industry has gotten, in my mind, has gotten as out of hand as it was back when you started Metrex, when people were like selling boron, for testosterone boosting, and I mean it was insane.
Right.
There was no. It was like the Wild West, and I feel like it's almost like that again. And maybe you can bring some semblance of sanity back into this industry with what we're going to be doing. And we haven't picked a day that it's going to be airing, but starting next week, you can catch Physique Star Radio. And I know that you're going to be supporting the men's physique category that's out there. You'll be the title sponsor as well of the men'sphysique.com, part of our sister or brother site to RX Muscle. And I think that we're going to really be able to disseminate a lot of new information. And I think that we're going to really work hard. I know that's the goal that you and I have set, to educate people so that they know what to believe and what not to believe. Because really, the internet is a wonderful thing, Scott, and I think you'll agree because it's a great resource of information. But unfortunately, there's no editing on the internet, so you don't know sometimes what's true and what's not.
Well, the problem is for almost anybody who has the gift of being rather glib to assume the status of an authority, and that's authority by fiat doesn't work in the real world. No. You can sell a lot of nonsense products with a good story, but again, the aspects of this particular realm of molecular biology, that is muscle hypertrophy, in a very positive way, have been augmented in the past decade by a fusillade of very well conducted studies that have drilled down to the absolute level of the molecular elements of this process. And it is a fairly well described process from the standpoints of the nuts and bolts of it. The nuances are far in the future from the standpoint of understanding, but from the practical aspect of what self-intervention strategies can be engaged to intersect these pathways, there's an abundance of knowledge about that. And, that's what people should focus on, is not what they hear from, their friend who says, well, I took this super pump, whatever it is, and, that's so huge. And I mean, that's great, except that, when the facts are examined, there really is no basis, even at a conceptual level, for a product like a nitric oxide, releaser to have a positive impact on muscle growth. And you could bet that by now, if any of those products had a substantive effect, given the volume of sales that have occurred over the past decade, there would be abundant scientific documentation of that fact. And there isn't, okay? There is none.
And this is an important...
There's the distinction, huge market, no science. Where have we seen that before? Well, I'm not going to live long enough to have that conversation.
But you make a really valid point, because you know what, the supplement industry has grown so much, but so has the price of supplements. It's not like it was back in the 80s and 90s. It's very expensive to buy this stuff, and if you're going to spend your hard-earned money that you're working your ass off during the week for, you want to know that what you're taking is actually working and why it works. And I think if you guys out there who are listening to this, you have questions about some of the supplements that you are using, do you think they are working? Do you think that it's worth spending your money on? Send your questions into us. I'm going to set up an email. I'll probably set up an email, dave@rxmuscle.com, and people could submit their questions so that the topics that Dr. Scott Connelly and I can address on Muscle University segment of the new radio show that will be coming up, Physique Star Radio. That will be starting next week, only on rxmuscle.com. Scott, it was great talking to you. We got so much to talk about in the upcoming weeks, and I'm really excited about the new product, Physique 2.0. I was told by Vince Andrich that I would be able to get some advanced copies of it, so to speak, or advanced samplings of it, so I can start taking it and let everyone know how I like it. Is that still on the table?
Yeah, as soon as, I've been promised the same thing. So as soon as I get some, you'll get some.
Now, is it gonna have, I know you're a stickler like I am for taste, and I know you always have the best flavoring guys on the job, but we could expect the same thing on this product?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a flavoring challenge, because there is one novel ingredient in it that has not a taste endpoint, but it sort of has a textural component, but it's a very valuable ingredient. So we've got a sort of a beta 1 version of it that I think anybody would find acceptable. But you're right, I'm kind of a stickler, so I'm going to be, evolving successive generations of the flavor until it gets to the point where I think it can't be optimized any further. So that's kind of where that is right now.
I expect nothing less than the best from you, Scott. The product is going to be called Physique 2.0 RST. The company is MyoTropics Physique Nutrition, and the website will be myotropics.com. I think that goes live later this week. Check out Scott and I on Muscle University segment of the Physique Star Radio Show starting next week as well. Scott, Sports Illustrated in 2009 labeled you the father of modern nutritional supplements. That's got to be a title that has got to be put on your shelf somewhere, because that's very impressive. I have to admit.
Well, I think, the contribution that I clearly have, made is that there are points of, intervention available in existing pathways that are real, that regulate, very important, issues relative to partitioning. And, people are just not aware of the degree to which you can manipulate these pathways, because they've been given nonsense proclamations from, on high, the main message being that it's, how many calories you eat. That's still a very pervasive issue that needs to be addressed constantly. And then second, that, the dynamics of protein are relatively straightforward. And once you get to a certain point, you lose the advantage of having more dietary protein. And obviously that's something that I like to rail against. And the other thing is that, there is a lot of information that has developed over the past 2 decades since I first, entered the industry, that has to do with the disposition of carbohydrate and the vagaries of, insulin dynamic that have a lot to do with this. And, all of that incorporated into the new product. So I think, it will be something that, will be well received by people who use it correctly, which is, again, as I say, to consider it really your core nutritional intake and use it in that manner, and consider foods kind of supplements, kind of the same paradigm that Metrix was. Metrix was an engineered food, meaning, this was a nutritional insurance policy, and you could use whole food, in a directed fashion as a supplement to the formula. And with the sort of spiraling cost of even crap food, once again, you made the point, and I think it's worth repeating, that, the cost of these avant-garde supplements is not cheap. And, dairy protein's price is now through the roof. And, if you're going to spend money, why not spend it on, if you looked at a simple metric like, grams of protein versus degree of new muscle growth, wouldn't you want to have the most efficient delivery of protein per gram of, product? I mean, that's what I think, this product represents. Is you could make a very defensible argument that it would represent, for the person who's really interested in muscle growth and fat loss, the least expensive, nutrient per gram available in the world today.
Wow. That's an interesting, I didn't even think of it from that perspective. Look, the product is going to be revolutionary. The way the original Metrix was, I have a very intuitive feeling about this. Scott, I'm excited, and in future shows we're going to get into some of the core ingredients in the product and explain some of the science of it. For now, though, we're going to also talk to a little later in the show Vince Andrich to find out how he twisted your arm enough to get you to do this again. I know it took a little pushing, shoving, and kicking in the ass. But Scott, I'm really glad you're back. I think our industry is going to thank you for it by when we start seeing the changes in people's physique from this new supplement. Scott, thanks for stopping by.
You bet. Talk to you later.
That was the one and only Dr. Scott Connelly. It doesn't get much better than that when it comes to knowledge on protein metabolism and the supplement industry as a whole. He is an icon, my mentor, and someone I'm very pleased to be working with again in the future, moving forward to Physique Star Radio starting next week. And I'm really thinking that you guys are going to like this segment that we do called Muscle University, because you're going to get to give your own feedback and select your own topics that you want us to discuss every week. And hopefully we'll answer all your questions. And that doesn't mean that we're going to cut back on all the science we talk about on Heavy Muscle Radio, because Chris and I will continue to debate different topics every week. And you'll get a little added jolt of science knowledge from Dr. Scott Connelly on Physique Star Radio. Next week, we will have Vince Andrich on the show, and he will be talking to us a little bit about what we're going to be discussing and what kind of the format we're going to have on Physique Star Radio. I think that the men's physique division needs a voice, and I think that there's a lot of regular people out there that want bodies that really mimic and emulate what these men's physique guys are trying to do up on stage. And as the sport evolves, the show will track all that. And I'm looking forward to finding out where that division heads to. Who knows? In 5 years from now, there might be more men's physique competitors than there are men's bodybuilders. It is possible. That doesn't mean we'll ever abandon bodybuilding, because we are the hardcore holy grail over here at RX Muscle. Anyway, great show. Next week, I have a very special guest in addition to Vince Andrich. I'm not even going to let it out of the bag yet, because I want to get you guys all psyched up and excited by who he is, but I guarantee you're going to love the interview. For now, that we're out of time, I'd like to thank Dr. Scott Connelly for stopping by. Until next week, remember, with Heavy Muscle Radio, the truth hurts.
Heavy Muscle Radio is a presentation of RxMuscle.com. The truth in bodybuilding. Tune in next week at the same time for another round with Dave Palumbo only on Heavy Muscle Radio.